Hi there, and welcome to another episode of How the Game Was Won. Today we'll be looking at the second decisive game that I'll be examining from round 5 of the FIDE Grand Prix currently being played in Tashkent. This game was played on the 26th of October 2014 between Nakamura as white and Gelfand as black. It must be said that Gelfand is having an absolutely abysmal tournament in Tashkent after winning in Baku. It's either that he's really exhausted after his efforts at winning in Baku, or that his efforts in Baku exhausted his current arsenal of attacks and surprises out of his existing opening repertoire, and he's needing to maybe get back to the drawing board after this tournament is finished. Either which way, this game Nakamura brings home the full point and in the process moves himself up to the head of the leaderboard. At the same time, this game, which is emanating out of the Moscow variation of the Sicilian defense, is a long one with an incredibly informative endgame. So what I will be doing is, yes, I'll be stopping at a couple of key positions through the opening and middle game, but I'm going to be attempting to apply far more of my energy and analysis into the various endgame positions, seeing that there are valuable lessons in there for all of us as far as good and solid endgame technique. But before I get into things, what I must say is that Nakamura stayed off the beaten path of the Moscow variation, and it led to a whole lot of interesting play, which is considered to be okay for black. And Gelfand got into a good position, but he miscalculated during the course of the endgame, which allowed white, where all of white and black's pawns on the queen side were weak, and this allowed Nakamura to win a pawn and lead to a position of a 4 versus 3 pawn endgame with rooks and knights. And after much pressure, the black's position eventually collapsed and Nakamura managed to push through for the full point. But let's play through the first couple of moves and get to the first position for us to have a look at and discuss. Obviously, as far as Sicilian is concerned, it's an e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5, bishop d7, bishop takes, queen takes, castle, knight f6, e5, d takes, knight takes, queen c8, queen f3, e6, and in this position, for instance, in the game between Tvyakov and WhiteElo, white, for instance, played d3 in this position as a way of developing the c1 bishop. That was played a couple of weeks ago in the Isle of Man, but in this game Nakamura instead played b3, which is still another way to be able to liberate the exact same bishop. This game continued with bishop e7, bishop e2, knight bd7, knight c4, and here black castles kingside. And that Nakamura is obviously just trying to reach a playable position out of the opening, and he's taken things into a much more quiet line where he can possibly outplay his opponent positionally rather than getting into absolutely punch-slugging tactical battle. And the game continued here with a knight c3, queen c7, a4, rook a8, rook fe1, a6, a5, knight b8, knight f4, knight c6, queen g3, exchange the queens with a knight d5, c3. Getting through the remainder of the moves here, we've got a rook c8, bishop a3, knight a7, knight e3, knight takes, d takes, rook c7, rook e1, knight b5, bishop e2, c4, b takes, knight e6, knight b6, knight e4. And yes, although white has got the extra pawn, he'll probably be needing to give it back fairly soon, especially if you look at the structure here where white's already got double pawns on the G file, double pawns in the C file, so at somewhere along the line, just to be able to normalize his structure, he will be needing to give back his extra pawn, as well as needing to do something about the powerful black knight that's sitting on e4. The game continued with bishop a3, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes, rook d3, knight jumps back to e4, knight b7, rook c8, f3, knight f6, at long last dislodging the knight from its outpost on e4, knight b6, rook c5, rook d8 check, rook e8, rook takes, knight takes, and in this situation it's heading into an endgame which should be more or less equal. White's space advantage on the queen's side is compensated for the fact that his pawns are effectively weak and under attack. However, an equal position is not necessarily drawn, as we'll see as the game progresses. We've got a rook d1, rook a5, rook d8, king f8, rook b8, and here black played rook a2 with a c5, rook c2, e4, f6, rook b7, king g8. I'm rushing through the moves here because I'm wanting to get to the meaty stuff within the endgame, but as you can see here, it's clear that white holds an advantage with following the last sequence. Black's position is passive, especially if you take into account that the once powerful knight is sitting all the way back on the edge of the board and not doing overly much. The game continued with a rook e7, king f8, rook takes e6. In this moment, the white gaining the extra pawn starts becoming significant because we're now developing into your 4 versus 3 on the king's side, and the black knight sitting on e8 is really not having a good time at the moment. Tries to get something happening with bringing the knight out to c7, and he needs to do something because he needs to exchange off that powerful pawn on c5 that white has got. Rook c6, knight b5, and yes, the exchanging of the powerful c pawn will effectively mean that he'll lose his a pawn as well, and then need to defend the 4 versus 3 that's left over. We got a knight d5, d4, rook a6, rook c5, rook a8 check, king f7, rook a7, king f8, knight f4, rook c6, rook a8 check, king f7, rook h8, h6, rook b8, rook c7, and now with those pawns exchanged off, as you can see, we're heading down into the 4 versus 3 with rooks and knights, and it's very much getting into an advantage for white, although the computer analysis tends to show that with careful play, black should be able to hold the position, but the team clinical computer analysis versus what the type of pressure the defending player faces at the board are obviously two totally different matters. The game continues with rook d6, a7, rook d6, knight b5, rook d5, rook d7, king h2, knight a7, rook d6, knight c8, rook c6, rook e7, rook a6, knight g6, knight h5, knight e7, knight f4, and interestingly enough here with knight g6, or just before black played knight g6, the computer was actually showing the game as dead even, but now showing it back to an advantage for white. Knight d5, knight e7, knight e3, rook c7, g4, rook c3, knight f1, rook c7, rook a3, rook d7, knight e3, rook d7, king g3, rook c7, rook a5, rook c3, king f2, rook c7 again, rook b5, knight g6, knight d5, rook a7, rook c5, rook a2 check. Still white holds the advantage. Gelfand's not really making much headway against the gradual and slow advance of the 4 versus 3 pawn structure. King g3, bringing the king up slightly. King g8, rook c7, rook a3, rook b7, rook a2, rook c7, rook a3. I think this is just trying to pick up a little bit of time in the clock, although through the process white's position is gradually getting more stronger and stronger. Rook d7, rook a2, knight e3, knight e5, rook b7, rook a3, knight f5, knight f7, king h2, rook a2, rook e7, rook a8, f4. The pawn starts applying a little bit more pressure. King f8, rook c7, g6, knight h4, and here black plays g5, knight f5, g takes f4, and rook c6, which is finally a little bit of a dent in the armor as far as black's defense is concerned. Because once white is able to take on f6, his e-pawn will be open to be able to push through. And in this case, what happened was the pushing through of the e-pawn got so tenuous for black that he was forced to that he was forced to give up a piece, which opened up the way for the G pawn to be able to get all the way through. And here effectively Black plays his biggest mistake of the game, which is knight e5. For instance, king g8, rook f6, rook a4 would have probably been able to survive probably for a bit longer. Whether or not it would be able to hold it out for a draw is another matter altogether. But after knight g5, the rook takes with check, which means that you have to play king g8, push the pawn to e5, and now the pressure of the e pawn starts getting worse and worse and worse, because white has way too many threats. There's the threat of the e pawn, the threat to be able to mop up the black's remaining pawns, and the threat to be able to get the g pawn through as well. And Gelfand simply can't deal with all of them. Rook a2, e6, knight f3 check, king h3, knight g1 check, and king h4. The counterplay that black's playing at the moment is effectively meaningless, because the king will simply from this position be able to join into the attack, and once again the black knight is left on the edge of the board. The black rook is far away from being able to do anything really meaningful as far as the attack's concerned, and it just allowed white to basically wrap things up with, after rook takes g2, king h5, and the king is now well and truly into the attack. Knight f3, the knight takes an h6 with check, king f7, rook f7 check, king h8, pushing the pawn all the way up to e7. The rook comes into e2, and all that happens here now is that black drops back, white drops back, mops up the f pawn, which means that black's position is totally hopeless. Gelfand actually resigned in this position rather than facing the inevitability of rook takes f3, for instance rook e8, king g6, get the king in front of the pawn, rook e6, rook f6, and the only thing that black can effectively do here is swap off the rooks, and with the knight covering g8 and the king in the position that it is at the moment, there will be absolutely nothing black can do to prevent the g pawn from going all the way through to queen. And I'll leave you with the position as it is. It's a mate in 5, and you can work out the conclusion to the mate in 5 in your own time. That's how the game was won. Please post your comments and questions down below. Click the like button, the little thumbs up that you see down there. Share this out amongst your chess friends, and while you're clicking buttons down there, click the subscribe button as well. That way you can be staying up to date on new games as I post them on a week-to-week basis. Stay carved up, stay safe out there. See you next time. Cheers.